Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating political puzzle, one straight from our source material. And it's this: how on earth do you build a political dynasty in a country that seems almost hardwired to reject the very idea of one? We're looking at Turkey, where it looks like a whole new political playbook is being written. Okay, so let's start with a fundamental rule of the game in modern Turkish politics. Our source material makes this crystal clear. The public there has historically just rejected inherited power. Time and time again, history shows that having a famous last name isn't a golden ticket to an election win. Just being close to power doesn't automatically make you legitimate in the eyes of the voters. And right there, that's the central puzzle we're going to try and solve today. I mean, if the culture, if history, if everything is stacked against you, what levers do you have left to pull? Well, the answer, according to our source, is pretty bold. And it's very, very systematic. So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll dig into this no princes rule. Then we'll look at how the entire political arena is being redesigned. After that, we'll examine the heirs' very public, very controlled audition. Then we'll zoom out to see how this fits into a bigger picture, with multiple generations and even some outside help. And we'll wrap it all up with a big question about what this means for real choice. Okay, so let's jump right into part one and get our heads around that cultural baseline. What makes this whole project so unlikely to begin with? So this no princes rule, it's not really about just wanting the best person for the job. It's something deeper. It's this built-in resistance to entitlement. For a long, long time, voters could actually act on that feeling, because their votes really mattered in a contest that was, for the most part, pretty open. But here's the million-dollar question. What happens when that contest isn't so open anymore? And that is the key to the entire new strategy. Which leads us to our next section. What if you could just sidestep the culture entirely by changing the system itself? This right here is where things get really, really interesting. See, the whole strategy, according to our source, isn't about persuading people at all. It's about redesigning the system so that their vote, it just doesn't mean what it used to. The success of this whole thing doesn't depend on public approval. It hinges on a new political architecture that's built from the ground up to manage the outcome. We're not talking about winning hearts and minds. We're talking about controlling the nuts and bolts of power. And you can actually see this happening over time. Look at these key moments where the democratic guardrails, so to speak, were taken down. In 2017, you have a constitutional referendum that creates this super powerful, hyper-centralized presidency. Then in 2019, the opposition wins the massive Istanbul mayoral election, and it just gets canceled and rerun. Fast forward to 2023, and the general election results completely defy what the polls were predicting in what the opposition called, quote, the most unfair election in years. Each of these moments wasn't just a political event. It was a fundamental change to the rules of the game. So the really crucial takeaway here is the shift. You see, we're moving away from a system of competitive politics, where, sure, maybe there's some funny business at the edges, to a brand new architecture, one that's engineered to basically guarantee the results before anyone even votes, through total control of things like the media, the courts, and the whole election process. Okay, so that's the theory. Now let's look at how this new system actually gets put into practice. And for that, we're going to focus on the president's son, Bilal Erdoğan, and a series of events that, they look a lot less like genuine civic engagement and a lot more like a very carefully staged audition. The stage for this audition? It's Istanbul's famous Galata Bridge, which the source calls Turkey's most cinematic political catwalk. For 3 years straight, a huge pro-Gaza rally has been held right here. Now, on the surface, the message is all about solidarity, but our source suggests there's a powerful second purpose at play. This is a stage, and the performance? It's about a lot more than foreign policy. And just look at who gets to use this stage. A rally put together by Bilal Erdoğan's coalition? Approved, no problem. But when the main opposition party wanted to hold a similar event right there in the same spot? Denied. It's just a perfect, clear-cut example of how the state now controls the public square. So even though the whole thing is presented as public solidarity for Gaza, our source argues that it's mainly a visibility drill for the heir. It's all about positioning him as a leader in civil society. And it's also a kind of loyalty test, right? Who shows up, who makes a point not to show up. In a system like this, an absence is never just an absence. It's a statement. But this whole project is bigger than just one son. This is looking like a multi-generational plan. And, maybe surprisingly, it's being quietly helped along by things happening way outside of Turkey's borders. And the sequence here is pretty telling. Step 1, Bilal Erdoğan is positioned as the, civil society face of continuity. Step 2, his son, that's the president's grandson, Umar Tayyip, gets a spotlight role at a big presidential diplomacy forum. This doesn't look like a one-and-done plan. It looks a lot more like they're building a multi-generational succession pipeline. But changing things inside the country is only half the battle. These external lubricants, as the source calls them, make the whole project much more doable. The argument is that for all the public talk about democratic values, key international players are quietly more interested in stability and Turkey's strategic importance. And that creates an environment where, this kind of democratic backsliding can happen more easily. And comments like this one essentially create an ideological green light. When a U.S. envoy says that, hey, maybe benevolent monarchies are the region's working formula, that completely reframes the conversation. Suddenly, authoritarian continuity isn't a problem to be solved, it's a pragmatic solution. And this is a perfect example of how that works in the real world. When a U.S. administration starts talking seriously about approving a huge F-35 sale, it sends a very clear message. And that message is, your strategic importance can absolutely trump our concerns about your democracy. It suggests that authoritarianism won't just be tolerated, it might even be rewarded. Okay, so let's tie all of these threads together. What does all of this ultimately mean for the future of democracy in Turkey? This one sentence from our source material really just says it all. You don't build a dynasty in Turkey by winning hearts. You build it by narrowing options. It's not a project of persuasion. It's a project of elimination. Think about it. The public can dislike a so-called prince all they want. They can be totally allergic to the idea of inherited power. But it might not even matter if the actual levers of politics, we're talking everything from who can run for office to how the courts rule, have already been moved completely out of their reach. That cultural no princes rule starts to change when the system is set up so that your feelings just don't have any real consequences anymore. And that leaves us with one last really crucial question to think about. If the political system is engineered to manage the outcome from the start, instead of reflecting what the people actually want, what does a vote truly mean? It's a question that gets right to the very core of what democracy is supposed to be and what it could be turning into.